So I'm Juliet Grayson, and I'm the chair and co-founder of StopSO.
Okay. And I am Terri Van Leeson. I'm a forensic psychologist. I used to work in the prison service. So I've worked in prisons. I now am in private practice, and I continue to do a lot of offender assessment work and still go into prisons. So hence, I suppose, my part in this discussion.
Right. Thank you. And I'm James Lawley. I'm a private psychotherapist who work with StopSO clients. And I'm particularly interested in finding out about the experience of sex offenders who go to prison. So I'd be very interested to call upon your experience. And so if you're happy, Terri, just to start it off, and then
Yeah.
Juliet, you add whatever you want to add, and I'll ask questions as we go along. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Right.
Okay. What I've done is I have a client who I'm a StopSO therapist also, and I have a client who came through StopSO, and he worked with me whilst he was on bail, pending the investigation from him being arrested. Internet material based offender, first time offence, had never offended before, and had never been to prison before. So somebody in their late 30s who, for all intents and purposes, is someone who doesn't have a long offending history. They're not somebody who's been in and out of prison. So this is quite probably the type of a client that we're going to be talking about. That profile, rather than somebody who's a repeat offender who's been in and out of prison a lot, or maybe somebody who is on a long sentence, like a life sentence prisoner. So very, very different. Somebody new to custody. So this particular client served a 5-month sentence recently. Was very shocked when he got a custodial sentence in court, and has served that sentence and has just been released last week. So I spoke to him yesterday, and he will add in to a working document that we've started. So that's going to be really helpful, I think, for this as well. So we get somebody's actual perspective. And what I've done is I've started this working document with some subheadings. So basically, I've got a few subheadings, starting with what happens at court after sentencing. Because I think if we're thinking of the type of client that we're probably going to have before us, it will be somebody who's never been to prison, and they may be feeling quite anxious, quite scared if they think they may be in line for a custodial sentence. And they may be asking us, what's going to happen? What might happen? What would I expect? And I have another client equally at the moment who's awaiting trial, who's going through that process from StopSO. So first of all, I suppose what happens at court, a solicitor, the solicitor of the client will be telling the client, or should be telling the client, come to court with a bag packed with some provisions, with, pajamas, toothbrush, etc. Come with a bag in case you get sent into custody. So normally a solicitor will advise all clients that. So even if a client in the end, they get a suspended prison sentence, or they get some sort of community order, they breathe a massive sigh of relief and they go home with their bag. But that's the general advice that tends to be given, because nobody knows whether Joe Bloggs is going to get sent to prison on the day or not. So that's the first thing. So if you are in that position where you're in court for sentencing and you are given a custodial sentence, it takes immediate effect. So from that moment the judge passes the sentence, you will be going to prison. So you won't be then given a few hours to go and sort out where your car is parked or that sort of thing. So really practical things that it's important to think about before the day. Okay, does that make sense?
Yeah,
so
a lot of sense. And that's I'm particularly interested in someone who it would be their first time in prison. Yeah, so you're on right on the spot. Thank you.
Good. So
yeah, I thought about the overnight bag, but I hadn't thought about the where you parked your car.
yeah. And you know, things like with your so it's good if you you know, you've got to think about how you're going to court. Are you getting on public transport? Are you getting dropped off? Are you going with a family member or a friend, somebody who's supportive, who, if you do go into custody, there's no worry about your car or, you know, whatever goes away from the court. So that is very important. You're then taken from the court by officers. There'll be, you know, escorting officers. So they might work for Serco or Group 4, whatever. They'll be working within the court, the systems, and you will be taken to the cells, the court cells, and you'll be held down in the cells there until you're then transported off to the receiving prison. Now, I'm going to ask the client who I've mentioned what his experience was. Quite often you're not given chance or an opportunity to speak to family or whoever. You're then taken away. But you may well be given an opportunity to speak to your solicitor, but that will be when you've been removed from the court. So you won't have an hour to sit in the court or out in a room and chat to the solicitor. That will all happen. It usually happens in the cells, within the court holding cells. So that's then what happens after that. I've put subheading transportation to prison. So you get transported to prison we've all seen these vehicles on the roads, I'm sure, where you are put in a specific vehicle where you're taken off to the prison. And these vehicles are, you know, they're not that salubrious. You are usually locked into when I say a box, that's probably not the way to describe it to a client because it might freak people out. But you'll be in your own little area. You'll be put in where you'll sit and you'll be shut in. There should be a window for you to be seeing looking outside. So you'll be taken away in prison or this type of transport. What happens when you're taken from the court is that usually the prison you go to is what we would call the local prison to the Crown Court. So the best example for me is HMP Norwich in the east. So if you are in Norwich Crown Court and you get sent to prison that day, you will likely be taken to HMP Norwich. That is the local remand prison, the receiving prison to the court that will take people from a trial or from cases, from sentencing, whatever. Okay, so that quite often the receiving prison is referred to as a remand. It can be a local category B level prison. So they will hold a variety of prisoners. When you get to that prison, you will be, it may be that you don't stay there for a long period, for the entirety of your sentence, but that's where you'll be initially, for want of a better way of putting it, processed and inducted into the prison system, to the prison estate. And as we know, the prison estate is national, so there's prisons all over the country. So when you arrive at the prison, you initially you'll go through an induction process. So you will be clerked in, and they will take, for example, you'll be undertaking a general assessment. That can be by prison officers, and or it could also be by some healthcare staff. It varies around the country as to who undertakes the aspects of that assessment. So, for example, at Norwich, you may, I used to work there as a in-reach consultant. It would be that you would have some of your induction assessment would be with a prison officer trained in inducting staff, inducting new prisoners received, and also there would be a mental health assessment, screening assessment done with each person, and that was often at Norwich, as an example, would be by a trained nurse. So, and it was a great system there where you'd have a mental health nurse actually doing that part of the assessment. So they got a little bit more specialist skills as well. Okay, so to summarise the induction, you go in, they will clerk you in. You will have some sort of question. You'll be asked a number of questions about yourself, your history, and so on. And it's at this point as well that you tell them if you've got a mental health history and or you've got a medical history. So if you've got a heart problem, you're on heart drugs, you have GTN spray, you're asthmatic, you have an inhaler, you tell them. This is a really important point to convey over all the real vital information about yourself as a person.
Can I just check, Terri? Am I right in thinking that not every prison has the mental health person assessing? So, okay, all right.
Yeah, not every prison will, but that's kind of best practice.
Yes.
But not every prison may have the capacity to have a mental health nurse there as well. Okay. But that said, within the induction assessment, the screening assessment, there are, though all those questions and areas are still covered, it will be by a prison officer. Okay. Yeah. At this point as well, at induction, your possessions will be taken from you. This probably feels quite traumatic, actually. It would be for me as a human being. I'm sure it is for any of us, but it's standard practice. So it's nothing about the client. The client's not being dug out in any way. Most possessions will be taken off the client and will be sort of logged in and clerked in and put away in the box ready for when that prisoner eventually leaves custody. There'll be some things that they will be allowed to have, but there'll be probably quite a lot of things they won't be allowed to have. So, for example, things like your mobile phone and your gadgets, or if you've got anything at all like that, money, your wallet, credit cards, all those sorts of things, and your medication. You will not be allowed to have your medication initially in your own possession. Okay, and again, that is not being difficult. That's just the way prisons need to operate in terms of who's got what medication on wings, who's got what drugs, etc., etc. And for some people, if somebody's very mentally unstable and they're really unwell and they have a crisis, we don't want people to have meds on them that they could perhaps take an overdose if they're feeling really, really distressed. Okay, so just saying that to the client, I think is helpful, because the client might have GTN spray and then they'll feel really anxious, or be arguing, no, you can't take this off me. It may be they're likely that will be taken off you initially. It may be that at some point you'll be allowed to have that in possession, as they call it, or in cell. Or it may be on the wing and it's held in the office by the prison officers. So as and when you needed it, you press your bell and then it would be brought to you. Okay. So that's, I think, all the things I can think of off the top of my head. My client will probably be able to really give some meat on the bones about what happened for him and what he did get and what he didn't get and so on. The final thing I'll say about this point of induction, you'll be at the receiving prison for a period of time. It may be that you're not there for too long, and that you may then get allocated to a more specialist prison. So what we would badge as a sex offender based prison. So there are certain prisons across the prison estate in the country that are purely prisons for people who've committed sexual offences. Okay, so sex offender based prisons. In this area, for example, in the eastern region, we've got HMP Buell, which is not far from Norwich, and that is a pure sex offender prison. So people who are housed there are generally only people that have committed sexual offences. There's other places like HMP Little Hay. There's also HMP Watton, which is near Nottingham. So they're examples of pure sex offender based prisons. So it may be that you eventually get allocated out and will eventually get transferred to a prison like that. You may. That's not uncommon. In the interim, when you're at the receiving remand prison, local prison to the court, you will still be housed on a VP unit, a vulnerable prisoners unit. So you will still be separated from the main, as it's usually referred to. So you'll still be in an area of that prison that, although that prison takes non-sex offenders, you will be separated. So the example being Norwich, you will be on the VP unit, the vulnerable prisoner unit there, where all sex offenders are housed, and even at what we call movement times. So when everybody's unlocked from the cell and you're moving around the prison, if you're going to healthcare or you're going to the gym or some activity, you will be moved at a different time to when the main prisoners are moved. Okay, and it's all very, very strictly and tightly controlled. So it isn't like it can be a bit fudged or, oh, well, should we move a different way today? It's all very, very clearly set out as part of that prison's regime. Okay. Does that make sense, so far?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Good.
It's very good.
Okay.
No, it's very valuable information. So thank you very much. Keep going.
Okay. Yep. So we've gone through there. Things to consider then. So once you're in prison, once you're there and you've been inducted, these are general comments that I've thought about, and I talked about yesterday with my client, but also I'm sure he'll be able to add more to this working document. The best way to be is to keep a low profile. Okay, there's no point being, hey, I'm here, I've just hit the ground, look at me. Prison is a very different world, and the best way to manage yourself, or advice, will be just to keep a low profile. Do not tell people about your convictions. Okay, so don't go around, and the minute someone goes, oh, what are you in for, mate? You start telling them every bit of finite detail. Okay, and that's really important, because even though you should be with other prisoners who are vulnerable, it's just best to keep your own convictions to yourself. Sometimes prisoners will have a hierarchy just to make themselves feel better. So, if someone is feeling a bit rubbishy about themselves, if you're someone that they think, oh, well, look how bad you are, you committed rape of a child, or that as an example, look, oh, you're really bad, I'm going to tell people about how bad you are. So that there is a hierarchy. There can be a hierarchy amongst prisoners, which the prison regime tries very hard to I can't think of the word, to not support, to be saying, look, we're all here, we're all equal, we'll get on with it. But that's just something to bear in mind. So keep it low profile. Don't go around telling people about your convictions, even if they ask. Just say, I don't want to talk about them, or, you know. Secondly, be polite to everybody. Everybody, just be polite. Don't argue or get into an argument with anyone. Some prisoners, and we've seen lots of stuff in the media in the last couple of years in particular. Sadly, at the moment, it's a reality. There's a lot more drugs in prison than there were 10 years ago. When I was working in prisons in 2010, they were pretty clean, pro-social places to be. We now know that, you know, drugs are an issue. The government are talking about it, and the Justice Minister. So it's not worth getting into an argument with anybody. You don't know the profile of the person you're arguing with. Okay, so they might be high on a substance. So if you start arguing, you're not going to be able to reason with somebody if they are under the influence of a substance, or they might have a lot of issues, or they might have mental health problems. So you don't know what else is going on for them. So even if you're right about something, it's not worth arguing about, really. You just need to get through your time, spend your time as productively as you can, and you don't need to unnecessarily make any enemies. If you have a problem, tell staff or ask staff for advice. So if you're having a problem with somebody else, make staff aware of that. Rather than try to solve it with other prisoners giving you advice, like go and do this to him, mate, or if you do that, just keep, as I say, the low profile and tell staff if you've got a problem. Always be polite to staff, all staff. There's no point not being, even if you're fed up or something hasn't happened that should happen. You know, and you'll, again, be prepared for a variety of responses from staff. Sometimes you'll go up to the staff and you want to ask about something or find out or clarify something. They might tell you to go away if they're busy. So if they're busy, they're busy, and you go back later. So just be mindful of that. And the staff are very busy on the ground now. There's less staff on the ground than there were when I was permanently working in prisons. So there will be times when they just won't have time to talk to you for 10 or 15 minutes about something. Do not divulge lots of personal information to other prisoners about yourself. For example, don't tell people about your history in detail, your job, you know, how much money you earn or earned, or if you've got a house, or just that sort of stuff. Just be mindful of what you do divulge, because you don't want to be opening yourself up to be potentially exploited by someone who's looking for money. Okay, so again, just that neutral, low profile. You can talk about things you like, things on telly, hobbies, interests, that sort of stuff. Sharing the time of day, fine, until you get to really know somebody. And even then, just lots of personal information is best kept perhaps to yourself. There's a system for finding out answers to key questions you might have. So they call it putting in an app or an application. There's the application process. So if you need to find something out about your sentence, or about what courses are going on offer, or about a job, you can putting an app in, or an application into the relevant department or place. And again, ask the staff about how you do that. You will be allocated somebody called an offender supervisor. This is sometimes a trained probation officer who works in the prison. But at other prisons, it might be a trained prison officer. So again, that varies around the country and from prison to prison. Your offender supervisor works in what's called the Offender Management Unit, OMU. So they will be able to let you know what sorts of things or courses are on offer in the prison. as well as the staff, you know, the general staff on the unit that you'll be on. You'll be able to ask them what's on offer, how do I get a job, how do I apply to go on this course, and that sort of thing. Okay. Then I've got a subheading, typical day. And before I go to that, just it's worth finding out what's on offer. I think I've got that under another subheading, but it's worth finding out what's on offer in the prison. What can you do? What can you get involved in? So a typical day, the prison will run with what I've referred to as a regime. They'll run a regime. And this regime, or routine, if you like, daily routine, absolutely nothing deviates from it. Okay, so this is how a prison will run, to run as smoothly as possible and as safely as possible. So you can't ask for it to be changed for any reason at all. You can't say, well, can I be locked up an hour later today because I want to do X, or I want to be out in the exercise yard a bit longer. There's absolutely no room for any negotiation on the regime across the piece, and that's even with staff. Okay, so again, as a client, you're not being dug out. That is just how a prison has to run. So this will mean you'll have periods where you are unlocked and periods when you're locked up in your cell. So they'll call it unlock or lock, you know, unlock time or lock up time, or some prisoners refer it to it as bang up time, when you're actually allowed in and out of your cell. Quite often now, the regime or the routine of a prison varies from prison to prison around the country. It will depend on how many prison officers they've got, what other things are going on, and what things are being offered in a particular prison. But usually, or generally speaking, there'll be a morning unlock where you collect your food, your breakfast, which is always served from a hot plate. So you go along a bit like a canteen, and somebody will be dishing out your food for you. And you collect your breakfast, and you some places you can eat it out in the general association area, other places, or you might want to take your food back to your cell. There's usually the morning unlock, and then there's also usually what's called a movement period. So that's a period when, in the routine of the prison, when you're expected to move around the prison. So if you're somebody who's got a healthcare appointment, there might be movement at, say, 8:30 for healthcare. So again, you have to go at the times that are stipulated. You can't think, oh, well, I'll go in a couple of hours, or I'll pop down later. Okay, so you will soon learn the routine of the prison you're in, and then and in a way it gives you structure, and you'll know then when I'm allowed in and out my cell. I know when I'm allowed to when I get my meals. I know when I go to healthcare, if I'm collecting my meds, my medication, if I'm not allowed to have it in cell, and that sort of thing. And also the movement period, you know, you might be someone that wants to go to the gym. So again, there'll be that period of time when, right, it's movement for gym. So you'll go off to the gym and you'll come back from the gym at a given time. There may also be an association period in that regime. And that could be possibly in the evenings, where there might be a couple of hours where you're unlocked. Everybody's unlocked on your unit, and you can associate with other inmates. You know, some places will have a pool table and cards, and I've got clients, for example, at HMP Watton, who play drafts and chess, you know, avidly into chess, and that sort of thing. So there are periods of time when you're out at association, as it's called, and you can associate with people. Again, hopefully you should get to know some people, and to be able to pass some pleasant time, you know, with people, and play cards or whatever. Keeping yourself busy. Find out what the prison officers offers where you are. Apply for stuff, get busy, stay busy. My client said this, you know, if you got to pass time in jail, just keep yourself as busy as possible. Apply for a job, any type of work or any type of courses or groups that you can do. One example was my client, he did a trauma group he attended for a while, which was run by the Wellbeing Service through healthcare in the prison where he was at. And he really got a lot out of that, just that general coping, emotional well-being, and learning new skills as well, like mindfulness and things, and just having something that he could focus on. So find out what's on offer and get involved in as much as you can. He did lots of crosswords, reading material. There should be a library in the prison, and there should be a gym as well. So you might never have been in a gym, but it might be that you just go down and you get a gym induction, and you get some advice off one of the gym instructors, the gym officers, who, or you do walking and a bit of exercising every week. Again, just try and build your week up so you've got things going on. And, you may be passing the time away and you might learn something new, that you can take with you when you leave prison. The final thing I'll say about that, before I go on to the last part, is the sex offender treatment prisons will run specific courses for rehabilitation. If you are on a short sentence, you will more than likely not be eligible to get on to these courses. You will not be prioritized, and you may not have the time to undertake those type of courses. And on some of the risk assessments, you may come out, if it's your first time ever in prison, you may come out as low risk on something called the Risk Matrix 2000. And that is a method that's used to help the system triage and prioritize the highest level of risk and need prisoner. So you may or may not, if you're on a short sentence, be eligible for those types of courses. But it doesn't stop you from attending other types of courses like my client did, like the wellbeing courses and things like that. The final subheading I've got is visiting times for family and friends. Each prison will have visiting times, and it should be on the website. So go to Prison Finder on the internet. If you Google Prison Finder, it'll come up with every prison in the country. So you scroll down, click on, and it will show the visiting times. Visits have to be pre-arranged in advance of any visit. So your family or your friend can't just pop in. You have to get the person that you want to visit you cleared through the security system first. So they have to be vetted. So you will have to complete a form and give some basic details about that person. That's standard procedure. Okay, again, nobody's being dug out. And once that person's on the system, then you can send out a VO, like a visiting order form to them, and say, well, they want to visit every week or every other week. And then there's a process, and that you can just automatically then keep applying for their visit. Okay, so you don't have to have them vetted every time once they're on the system, but they do have to initially be cleared to become one of your visitors. And some prisons are more now advanced, and visits can then be booked online electronically as well. So again, that varies. Those are the main things I've thought about off the top of my head. My sure will probably give some more helpful experience-based stuff, how he felt and what he did, if he felt anxious or overwhelmed, and what's helpful to do, etc. But those are the main things I could think of. I hope they're helpful.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, very helpful, I'm sure, Terri. Do you want to start, Juliet? Said you had a question or two.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. That was really helpful, and it's really good to get a kind of a sense of how it works from someone who's been involved in the system. I've got two questions that occur to me at the moment. One is, I understand there's an issue for them of getting money in.
Okay, yeah.
They put on an account, and how do they, what can they use money for? What do they need money for? And how do they get money in
Yeah. Okay. Do you know, that's a really good question. I've never see a prisoner with money. There is a system for them putting the money on account, and I think it's deducted from account when they buy things on what's called canteen. So there'll be a canteen day. They will be allowed to purchase certain things. So there will be a bit like a menu of things or a list, and a catalogue. For example, I know one prison I used to work in, people could order things out the Argos catalogue.
Oh, right.
There'd be certain things that they could order. And there's what's it called? There's an actual word for it, in terms of the department, but it's all in hand. It's all, again, goes through that particular system. So they'll apply to purchase something from their account, as long as they've got the money in their account, that's fine, and it can be deducted off the account. So things like tea bags, or if someone wants chocolate as well, or magazines, things like that. Again, you don't actually physically have the money in your hand. It will come off your account, and again, you will order things through a system. And
one of the things that I understand from the family network, which I keep into a little bit, is that when they first go in, if they haven't got money on their account, then they can't get their tea bags or whatever, because there is no money, and it takes time to get it onto the account.
Yeah.
And so the money that they go in with, if they've got cash in the pocket, that gets put onto their account?
The honest answer is I don't know. I'll check with my client. It should do. And even if it takes 24 hours or so, it should do that, because an account is set up for them. I'm going to make a note of that so that we can include that. Yeah.
The other question I have is around phone calls.
Yeah.
You know what the system is, and do they have to have money on their account before they can make a phone call? I think.
They do.
So I think there are people who haven't yet had money from work and all of that. Anything you know about that would be helpful.
Yeah. Yes. Actually, yeah. I'll include that as well. Phone. Yeah, definitely. They will have a phone account, which they will have to put money on, and they will the individual also, you have to have the number vetted. So you'll have it's called on their PIN. They'll have a list from security of people that they are allowed to phone, and they will only be able to phone those particular people the way it's set up. So they can't just pick up and phone McDonald's or phone someone else who they're not, if it's not actually cleared and on their PIN system.
Right.
So that's important, and whether we like it or not, if you're not on the PIN, they can't phone you. So either your wife or your sister or whoever. So again, it's a bit like with the visiting. There has to be some basic information given across. The prison will check through that, and then they will add that individual to that prisoner's list of who's allowed to be called. And for example, I'm on the PIN of a number of prisoners, and security will phone my office and ask, Dr. Van Leeson, Joe Bloggs has asked for your numbers to be cleared, your work, you know, the office number, and are you happy for that? And I obviously their clients, yes. So again, it's all controlled.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing I suppose to mention is that quite often phone calls can be listened into.
Okay.
You know, some phone calls will be, it can be a random selection, or it could be targeted if you know, security are concerned about anything in particular, and they're just looking across who's talking about what, you know, if people are trying to bring drugs in, or even if people are making threats to somebody on the phone. You know, it's all very important. But I suppose also on the other end of that, it's just being aware that you could be listened to. Every time I speak to a prisoner on the phone, there's nothing I won't say that I don't, you know, want people to hear, even if the prisoner's upset and he's had a row with a member of staff, and, you know, I'm talking about, you know, how he feels and what's the best way to go about repairing that or sorting himself out. You know, so it's just mindful of that. A prison is a very open space in that respect, even your phone calls.
And is that the same?
A limit to the length of time of a phone call?
Yes. It's interesting because some jails now have got phones in cell.
Oh, okay.
Quite new. And I'm a bit behind on that. I think it might be at Oakwood. Some of the private prisons, they have got phones in cell. That's very different. But not all prisons have. So, for example, at HMP Watton, you may have, you know, a couple of phones at the top of the wing, top of the unit, and you have to wait and queue up and wait your turn for your phone call, which will last for 10 minutes or however long. Yeah. And when your phone call is about to finish, you'll hear some beeps going. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to ask about the listening of the calls. Is that, I assume that's the same for written communication that comes in and goes out? It's all looked at. Yeah.
Yes. And again, it could be random, or it could be, you know, it could be random, or it could be targeted. So again, nothing in a prison is, you know, nothing is completely confidential.
Right.
And I also understand that
apart from if you're having a phone call with your solicitor, your legal brief, those phone calls are confidential. They are supposed to be confidential and are not permissible to be listened into. But other than that, you know, everything's pretty open, really.
I understand that in some prisons, family members can send an email and that will get printed off and given to the prisoner the next day or something.
Yes, there is now. There is now a system for being able to email prisoners again, which is I think is really good. And some places you can get an account, so you can correspond. For example, if you've got a client that's in custody, I know at Oakwood, where my client was, there was the facility to do that. So we could have communicated on email. We didn't in the end, but I have communicated with some life sentence prisoners, for example, just updating on what they're up to and what they're doing and how they're coping. Yeah.
Right, thank you. The particular concern that the client I'm working with is, should he receive a custodial sentence, is being bullied, raped, even murdered. And he seems to think that it's actually highly likely that that will happen to him. Do you have any knowledge of how likely sex offenders are targeted?
It's an area that understandably everybody worries about. That's why there's vulnerable prisons, so that people who have committed sexual offences are segregated. It's a difficult way to advise clients because we don't want to frighten people. That is why I keep a low profile, don't talk in lots of detail about yourself in any event. If I'm being completely blunt about it, many years ago, you know, we're talking probably 30 years ago, the culture in prisons used to be not pro-rehabilitators, were very different once upon a time. And I think there's still, if you've never worked in a prison or been in a prison, there's still perhaps the fear and some of the carryover of, you know, or what it's terrible and you're all beaten up and it's a horrible place to be and everybody's nasty to you and all the staff. It's not like that now, and shouldn't be like that now. There are diversity agendas, and there are respect agendas, decency agendas that staff are trained in as well. It's should be a pro-rehabilitation ethos, so everybody should be treated with dignity and respect. So that's important to kind of perhaps highlight that to your clients. Say, look, there are real respect and diversity agendas out there now. Prisons should be places of decency. It has happened where people are raped in prison or they're targeted and they're beaten up. But I would perhaps get the client to think more about things to do if you've got a problem. Tell staff, make staff aware, don't make enemies unnecessarily, so that you make yourself more vulnerable within that type of environment. People, if you're you're associating, people play chess, but do stuff the way you're out in the open, and things like that. So it's a difficult one. I mean, I could talk about it in a different way, but I think, you know, and I've had clients who have been raped and who have been compensated as well over years. I can tell some stories, but I don't think that's helpful. It's not the average. So it's not the kind of, this happens to 80% of prisoners. I think that's, you know, it's about us having a perspective, and just being able to say to our client, your client, look, there is a decency agenda, a diversity agenda, a respect agenda. There's lots of there's procedures that if you're feeling really stressed or really, if you feel frightened, genuinely frightened about your safety, you go and you make that known to staff. You tell staff that I fear that I'm going to be raped or I'm going to be targeted by these people or by X. I do not feel safe. You communicate that. And staff have a duty of care to act on that. Okay, so I suppose it's conveying that there are things there in place that should be there to safeguard you.
I have been following the Family Network support group, which we have an online support group at StopSO.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of those people have gone into prison, or their family members have gone into prison, and it's the number of problems that people are getting in prison are surprisingly few, and I don't think I've heard of anyone being raped or attacked in prison.
Good.
There's a slight shunning thing in a main prison, and then as soon as they were moved to the vulnerable prisoners unit, everything got much better.
Yeah.
And so the general message that people are putting out on that forum is that it's not an unsafe place to be, and by and large, the VPU units are good, and so I'm not messages of horrendous things in current prisons over the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's nice to hear that back through the family forum. Actually, that's really positive. And the other thing about it as well, adding into that, James, for your client is VPUs, sex offender units, tend to be calmer, more safer, respectful, places to be. It's always been a kind of a thing, and with staff, you know, that people that seem to be, want a better way of putting it, more manageable. You know, there's a number of reasons why, which, you know, I haven't got all day to go into that, but they are. And for example, I've got a client who it may be facing custody. He's in the East here, and if he does go into custody, I've been talking it through with him, he may end up in HMP Bure. And actually, it sounds mad, maybe me saying this, but it's a nice prison. It's a nice place to be. If you're a prisoner, if you've got to be in a prison estate, I'd rather be in Bure. There's lots of things going on. There's activities. It's clean. There's lovely gardens and gardening, and actually, there's some really nice prisoners in that prison. You know, people with some really positive qualities as well, who you can be, you know, make some good friends with, play chess with. So definitely, and that's really positive to hear, Juliet.
One of the other things I've been aware of, again through the family forum, is that prisoners can get moved at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And the family member might be going to visit them the next day, and suddenly they're not going to be there. So there's that quality of uncertainty for everybody.
Yes, yes. And that may be due to lots of operational reasons. You know, something might have happened somewhere else. They're having to, I don't know, disperse prisoners or move people around the whole system, you know, and it just is what it is. But hopefully, you know, it doesn't happen all the time.
But what can happen is that someone gets moved to somewhere that's 4 or 5 hours away from where their family live, and then there's difficulty with visiting, and so just something to be aware of as a potential issue.
Yes, yeah.
Well, thank you for that. It's you know, it's very useful to hear perspectives from all those different sources. And you know, what I'm working with the client is not reality, but his emotional fear.
Yes.
As you two have well known, once emotional fear gets strong enough, then you know, it's not a case of just providing the facts. I've provided a few facts, and they've not yet had any effect whatsoever in this particular situation. And so his level of fear, I believe, is way beyond the potential danger, but that's what he's experiencing, and he's absolutely terrified, and even talks about that if he goes in, he thinks he'll never come out, except on in a hearse. So he's extremely scared about it. So this is
quite distressed.
Yes, and this will be useful background information that I can back up my claims from before, and also Jules provided some useful links in a previous email as well.
Yes,
It's valuable. So I'll pass those on. Well, it's been
definitely
really, really useful, Terri. I thoroughly appreciate you giving up your time to educate me and potentially other people in this area. So you know, thanks very much.